This is the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. The first time someone explores non-monogamy, it can trigger reactions that they never saw coming. Going into it, you may have been confident that this was the right move, and you may have believed in the concept of expansive love. But the first time that your partner connects with someone else, your body might react like there's danger. Your heart races, your stomach drops, and suddenly you're questioning everything. So what's actually happening in that moment? In this episode, we're exploring a provocative idea that moving into non-monogamy can feel a lot like taking a psychedelic. Not because substances are involved, but because both experiences can fundamentally disrupt your default assumptions about reality. When people take psychedelics, their usual sense of certainty can loosen. Long-held beliefs are questioned. Emotions intensify. The part of you that craves control can feel destabilized. Whether this experience ultimately results in an overwhelming bad trip or a growth-producing event depends on things like your mindset going in, the environment that you're in, and how supported you feel. Non-monogamy can create a similar psychological shift. It challenges long-held narratives and assumptions about exclusivity and security. It can activate intense emotions and attachment responses, and it can shake your sense of control. While you can't necessarily avoid that intensity, you can learn how to successfully navigate it. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to explore how to craft secure, non-monogamous relationships and how to work skillfully with the intense feelings and emotions that might arise along the way. My guest is Dr. Nicole Thompson, a sex and relationship psychotherapist providing psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy and host of the popular podcast, Modern Anarchy. She is the author of the Psychedelic Jealousy Guide, Crafting Secure Non-Monogamous Relationships. She is also the founder of The Pleasure Practice, where she supports individuals in crafting pleasurable sex lives and expansive non-monogamous relationships. This is going to be another fascinating episode that you won't want to miss. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. Are you curious about sex and psychology in other countries? Join me and Sexual Health Alliance as we expand your knowledge through their study abroad programs. We'll explore different cultures, engage in immersive learning experiences, and collaborate with international experts while traveling to amazing places and having fun with students from all around the world. Since 2015, Sexual Health Alliance has remained at the forefront of sexuality education. Join me and Shaw and a global community of students for a transformative study abroad adventure. Our 2026 study abroad offerings include courses in Paris and Amsterdam. Check them out and learn more at sexualhealthalliance.com. Come meet fantastic people and be at the leading edge of sexual health education with Sexual Health Alliance. Spots for 2026 are available now. Visit sexualhealthalliance.com to secure yours today and embark on an exciting global adventure to study sex and psychology with me. Hi, Nicole, and welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so delighted to be here, and hello to your audience. It's nice to meet all of you.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. So we're going to be talking all about how to create secure, non-monogamous relationships in this episode. And in your work, you describe moving into non-monogamy as a kind of psychedelic paradigm shift, not because there are necessarily substances involved, but because it can radically disrupt how we've been taught to think about love, safety, and exclusivity in relationships. And a lot of people intellectually believe in the idea of expansive love, but the first time they're in a non-monogamous relationship and their partner connects with someone else, their body can react like there's a real threat. Their heart starts racing, their stomach might drop. It might feel like danger to them. So can you talk to us a little bit about, what's actually happening in that moment physically and psychologically? And in what ways is that experience similar to what happens when somebody's on a psychedelic trip?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so passionate about talking about this, and it comes both from my work with clients, but also my own personal journey. I grew up in purity culture, had the purity ring. Almost everything that was pleasurable was forbidden in that way. And so, yeah, I too cognitively saw the ideas of non-monogamy as attractive and something that I wanted to practice. And then, I joke with my clients that you can read all of the books about swimming, but until you actually get in the water, there's some real lived somatic experience of what that is like in your body, right?
Yeah.
And so we know that historically monogamy is a very small experience in the human experience. This has not been for many decades that we have been practicing monogamy as a culture. And even now around the world, there are still cultures that do not practice monogamy, right? So there's so many people like, is this possible? But culturally, with some humility, we know that humans have practiced and still do practice non-monogamy. But within our context, which has been so deeply colonized by a lot of puritanical thinking and Christianity, it's absolutely forbidden, right? And so you just come up into this world where this is the norm. It's in the media we see, it's in the laws of who gets tax benefits and all of that, right? And so in so many ways, we are conditioned from even our youngest ages when we have crushes on other people. Nope, you pick one. You get to pick one, right? And so there's all this conditioning that has been happening for years of your life. And so when you step into a different paradigm, you're trying to unlearn years of conditioning that's on the unconscious level that is taught safety equals exclusivity. Safety equals blank, blank, blank. And so when you step into a new paradigm, it's like a psychedelic experience because the walls of your reality of what you once thought was happening are now melting.
Mm-hmm.
Where am I? Who am I? What am I doing with my life? Where are we going? And specifically, we don't have enough models, right? We're getting more and more each day, but we don't have enough models of non-monogamy. So then you step into this container of like, what is this? What am I doing, right? And so, of course, the body is going to have that primal panic. My mentor, Jessica Fern, always talks about that, right? The primal panic where it feels like if your partner is going to go be with somebody else, usually on an unconscious and sometimes conscious level, we're thinking, they're going to leave me. I'm going to be alone. That person's going to be more attractive, X, Y, Z. And that makes sense because we've never walked this land. We've never swam before, right? And so there's so much there that we have to unlearn in the conditioning. And I really love remembering just that this is something that's been ancient and practiced for many years in our human condition. But it's the smaller blip of time that we live in right now that makes it exceptionally difficult.
I appreciate you bringing all of that up. And it has me thinking about how, and a lot of the work and writing that I've read on consensual non-monogamy, some of it tries to pretend like jealousy doesn't exist, right? That, this is a community where jealousy just isn't a thing. And, I have had some participants in studies I've done on polyamory who are like, jealousy, what's that? Like, I don't experience that emotion. And so, I get that for some people, that just might not compute for them. Like that might not be part of their non-monogamous experience. But for a heck of a lot of people, jealousy is a thing that does come up. And it's something that people need to learn how to regulate or navigate. And like you said, we just don't have any models for how to do that, especially for people who are totally new to this world. And, something that you talk about in your work and that I appreciate is how it doesn't start with the communication scripts. In so much of the writing on non-monogamy, it's like, okay, let's start first with communication. You start first with somatic regulation. I think that's so important because in these discussions about how jealousy might come up in the context of non-monogamy, you're going to have that amygdala activation and stress hormones that are flooding your system. And you're not going to be able to think very rationally or logically. And so, when jealousy comes up, you can't just logic your way out of it, right? So how do we engage in this somatic regulation and learn to deal with jealousy in more helpful and productive ways?
Yeah. What a lifelong journey in that, right? And with so many of the clients that I've worked with, it sounds like jealousy can transform. Maybe it's no longer about the sex that they're having, but it can be about, the smaller little things of the plans that they made that feel kind of imbalanced, so it always just kind of moves to a new topic in that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's normal in all of our human relationships to have moments of that, whether it's friendship, family, sexual dynamics, right? This is just a normal part of the human condition, but our response to it can drastically change. So many of my clients look at me and the relationships I have in non-monogamy and polyamory, and they're like, you make it look so easy. And I'm like, oh, don't let me fool you. When I first started, I remember one of my partners just going to dance with somebody at a bar, and I cried, just cried
Mm-hmm.
deeply. And if you look at my personal historical context coming from purity culture, I was really taught that a man and a woman should never be left alone. Queer sex doesn't even exist, so we don't need to worry about that, of course, right? Sad. But that's what I was taught, right? And so I remember even further back, before I even knew the word non-monogamy, just one of my lovers going to have coffee with another woman. I lost my shit, right? And so you're seeing this expansion over time where now I get excited when my lovers are connecting with other people. And compersion is something that I can really tap into with much more ease, right? And that, I think, is a slow exposure therapy process to relearn a new map of what love can be. Again, we don't have these models, so you have to slowly engage. And so usually what I talk about, if we're thinking about somatics, look at the wisdom of the body. When you want to, for example, I'm a rock climber. When you want to get up the top of a mountain, you don't just do that day one. You want to run a marathon, you don't just do that day one. You start with a jog, you start with a little climb, right? And so usually when I'm working with my clients, I talk to them about the zone of regulation, right? That capacity that we have to stretch and get into discomfort, but not wanting to get out of it where we are completely crying on the floor, spinning, and completely distraught. I laugh because I've been there, And those are the moments where you got to pull back a little bit. And so I talk about it in the same way that you would talk about it with an athlete, right? How can you push? If you are waiting to get into non-monogamy until it's comfortable, unfortunately, in our current paradigms, I don't think that's going to happen. Unless you were raised by some really cool parents. And some of my clients have been. And I'm always jealous for their journey. But most of us have not. And so there is a reality here that it's going to be uncomfortable. And we can also stretch in that discomfort. Even when we are building muscle as athletes, we truly rip those muscles apart and they rebuild stronger, right? But we don't want to actually have a full, complete rip of the muscle because then you're not functional anymore. However, there is that bit of an edge where you're stretching, right, on the micro level, and that's what's happening in the body. And so with my clients, I'm working with them to first, acknowledge in your body. When you have jealousy, yeah, all the thoughts are going, I'm going to be abandoned, I'm going to be X, Y, Z. But how are you feeling in the body first? Because as you named, when we get activated, we go into some of the older parts of our brains, the amygdala, and we quite literally know that when we're in that part of our brain, we're no longer as engaged with the prefrontal cortex, which is where we make executive thinking and these logic-based decisions. So typically, in my own experience working with clients, right, you've got past your zone of regulation when you start getting into black and white thinking. Fuck this relationship. I can't do this. This never works. This is a complete disaster. I need to get out. Oh, okay. I've hit my zone. Okay. I'm feeling that discomfort in my stomach, my chest, all these things, right? I feel like I want to run. I feel like I want to fight. I feel like I want to do whatever that is. Okay. How can I come back to my body and start there? Because again, I'm not going to be thinking wisely when I'm activated like this, right? And so usually I do grounding techniques with people. I'm sure, you're familiar and your listeners are familiar with like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 of somatic work. And I also think it's really beautiful to invite your community and your lovers to support you in that. You don't have to do it all by yourself. There's so much co-regulation that can occur where you share with them what you're feeling, and you can use mirror neurons with one another with a more regulated person, which is a lot of what happens in therapy, right? But we can do that with our community to share what's going on and be supported in the body. And what I think is really important too is that jealousy, like the psychedelic experience, is predicated upon your set and setting. So in the psychedelic framework, we talk about the set as your mindset. So I get into that in my psychedelic jealousy guide of all the different mindsets, the frameworks, the narratives about your relationship that are at play. And we can do a lot of that internal rewriting. Love is abundant. Time and energy is not, but love is abundant. And what do I want to do with that? But there's also this piece of the setting. And so the reality is if you're in a dynamic where someone is not communicating with you fully, someone's not showing up for the relational agreements, there's not going to be the fertile soil for compersion. It makes sense that jealousy would be heightened. And so I think that's such an important thing to be thinking about is when we are experiencing jealousy, what part of that is the mindset and my own internal work to do? And then what part of it is the setting of this relationship and this dynamic? Are there things that need to be shifted there too? Because I know so many of my clients will go first to themselves, like something's wrong with me, something's wrong with me. Meanwhile, that person maybe broke a relational agreement. And I'm like, hey, the conditions here, the soil is not fertile for the flower, right? Like, so it's that dance between the yes and of both sides and really doing a lot of that transformation work. And when we do psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, we know that the experience with the drug is profound, but it's the integration afterwards, right? So how can you integrate the wisdom that you're learning as you go through this experience rather than just expecting non-monogamy to be a flip of a switch that you can just turn on and suddenly be here? That is not how it works. It's truly a journey of lots of integration and change.
It absolutely is. And, I think you make a lot of really important points there that successful non-monogamous relationships aren't just a matter of good communication and having a detailed relationship agreement. It's also a matter of how you personally deal with the emotions and feelings and other things that are going to come up along the way, because they inevitably will. And if you don't find a way to deal with or process those emotions that's healthy, you're going to end up spiraling out every single time. And it's not going to feel like a very healthy dynamic. And that doesn't necessarily mean that non-monogamy isn't right for you, but maybe you just haven't cultivated the skill set that you need first in order to figure out how to make it work. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong with non-monogamy, is that they try opening a relationship and they encounter those feelings and they're like, oh, nope, not for me. Like, I got to get out of this. I think with a lot of things, when it comes to exploring sexual fantasies or trying new types of relationships, it's something where practice makes perfect. Like, you can't just do it and try it once. And, you also make that really important point about the context of the relationship. And maybe non-monogamy isn't going to work for you with this one particular partner because maybe there have been too many breaches of trust in the past, but maybe it would work really well with somebody else that you had a much more secure attachment to. So yeah, it's such a complicated thing that you can't just write like one definitive guidebook that says, this is how you do non-monogamy, because everyone's journey is going to be a little different. What if the everyday things you rely on were built with intention? I've been thinking lately about how even the small details in our daily routines shape how we feel, especially when it comes to rest. Because how you sleep affects everything: your mood, your focus, your patience, and your relationships. This is one of the reasons I love Cozy Earth. Their products are crafted with incredible attention to detail, from their ultra-soft, temperature-regulating comforters that offer a cloud-like feel with just the right amount of support, to their essential socks that are breathable, cushioned, and just feel great from the moment you slip them on. I never realized how much these things matter until I experienced the difference. Having a comforter that has just the right amount of weight but doesn't get too hot makes all the difference for quality sleep. And the socks? They're one of those small upgrades that just make everyday life more luxurious. Cozy Earth offers a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty, so you can feel the quality for yourself. Returns are easy, but after experiencing this level of comfort, you're not going to want to send it back. Discover how care in every detail transforms simple routines into moments of true comfort and ease. Head to CozyEarth.com and use my code Justin for up to 20% off. And if you get a post-purchase survey, make sure to mention that you heard about Cozy Earth right here. Experience the craft behind the comfort and make every day feel intentional.
That's why I had so many questions in my book. Rather than telling you how to do it, I had so many reflective questions. What are the narratives for you? What do you need for safety? What is the context, the history, all of that? And the reality is that I think when people are new to non-monogamy, they see it as just one way of practicing. The non-monogamy umbrella is huge. Mm-hmm. There are so many different ways to do this. And some frameworks of non-monogamy might be absolutely terrifying, where there's a more, fitting framework in orientation or practice, like I like to say, and you were saying, right? Again, this is a practice that would be better fitting. So I think sometimes when people try on one form of non-monogamy, maybe that just wasn't the right orientation and there is a different way, or you heard someone talk about it and that's just not the fit that would be good for you. And I think the other thing is that when did we say unlearning systems of oppression would be easy?
Never.
But I think a lot of us have that.
Yeah.
And so much of the romance myth is always to follow what you're feeling, right? Follow what you're feeling. Love is a feeling. Follow it. If you're in love, go to the ends of the earth, feel it, right? Versus a choice and a practice. And so, yeah, when you think about the choice to practice non-monogamy, right, it's going to be difficult because of the systems that we live in. And again, maybe you grew up in a container where your parents were already practicing. It already is in your community. And you know what? That's going to be a lot easier than people like me who came from purity culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm working with clients who are struggling, you'll also have to find your why. For me, as a feminist, for me as someone who's looked at the history of the control and the restriction of women, oh yeah, I've got a big why in exploring my own freedom, right? And what that means to do that in a loving community and help the people around me to also get to explore that. And so I work with my clients to find their intention. When we go into a psychedelic experience, we have an intention, at least in the therapeutic frame. And, in the non-therapeutic frame, having fun and play is also a beautiful intention, folks. It doesn't have to be always about healing and growth, right?
Yep.
But in your non-monogamy journey, I think it can also be really powerful to find your why and your intention, because there are going to be moments in that journey where you, again, the ego death of it all, right? Where am I? What am I doing? How did I get here? And the intention, the why, can help you to ride those waves. And it forms a light post that you're moving towards. It's not a direct path, but just a light post that you can keep reorienting yourself to.
So you mentioned how there are different frameworks for non-monogamy. And in your writing, you've talked about how you can think of our relationships, like a metaphor for them, as the solar system, right? Where we have different partners who are kind of orbiting around each other at different frequencies. And, I think it's a really useful and helpful framework because, if you think about this in the context of a monogamous relationship, maybe you just have two planets in that system that are pretty close together, orbiting very closely to one another. But in a non-monogamous context, maybe you've got those two planets and they each have a series of moons that are orbiting around them. Maybe you also have shooting stars that come in occasionally, that come in real hot, real fast, but then they disappear like as fast as they came in. Or maybe you have a meteor or comet that kind of like enters the system and is there for a longer period of time, but then disappears eventually. So can you talk to us a little bit about sort of this solar system framework and how it can help people to think about and anticipate how a non-monogamous relationship might look or work?
Absolutely. I think the biggest framework to add on to that also comes from my dissertation on relationship anarchy. So we can start first with the reality that we all have solar systems. We all already have multiple moons and shooting stars. Now, do we all have sex with all those people in the system?
Sometimes.
Exactly. And I love to do that, And some people who maybe are in a more monogamous orientation don't, right? But before we get even into the solar systems, let's just acknowledge that we all already have them. You already have people that you are intimate with. You already have people that you see on different frequencies, right? And I think that frame is one of the biggest things I hope to do with my work in my lifetime, is to invite the world to reflect that we all already have multiple relationships. I think if we got to that level of intention with all of them, we'd be in a very different world. Now, whether you have sex with them or not, I just hope that you're being intentional and caring with the people in your world. That is the biggest thing I hope for. And then you have the freedom to choose the intimacy that aligns with you, right? Because I get so many questions where people are like, how do you have time for all this? I'm like, you actually already do. You spend time with multiple people. You just don't usually have sex in those dynamics. But you could. Right? And so when I think about the solar systems, I think about, yes, seeing the expansiveness of what we already have and acknowledging, rather than hierarchy of who's more important, they all play a role. They all play a beautiful role in the system. And there's going to be different frequencies. Maybe you have people, as you named, that are a comment that come through. And I almost said just a word, right? Like, but that is a beautiful comment that is flying through. You have a beautiful connection with them. And that plays a key role in your solar system. And so does the sun, the moons that orbit you. And when we think about the solar system, there is a proximity to the sun where we would be burned and life would not be sustainable on this earth. And there is a distance where it'd be truly too cold. And so part of what we're doing in our relational life, again, regardless of whether you're non-monogamous, is finding out what is the frequency of orbit and proximity that I want to have. Right? We do that in our friends. We do that in our family. We do all of that. And so in non-monogamy, a similar world, you can have just so many variations. And I think that that gets us outside of sometimes the boxes where someone's like, oh, I'm a swinger, so it means I do this. Or, oh, I'm poly, it means I do this. Or, oh, I'm open, and it means I do this. If we just step back and think about it as a relational orbit and system, it gives us more fluidity. Hey, this comment came in. That doesn't mean I have to change everything of what happened in my type of orientation. It's just the way of what's happening in my solar system. And then also to understand that your lovers, your friends, your community also have that. So how can you be conscious of the orbits and creating space for the other people in that system? I think it's a powerful metaphor just to think about the ways that there's already so much happening, so much abundance of connections, and then getting clear on what sort of orbit do you want with people.
Yeah, I think that's really beautifully described and a really helpful way of thinking about relationships in terms of figuring out what our healthy orbit is, right? Because as you mentioned, sometimes you can orbit too close and that can become a bad thing, right? It's I think what codependence is in relationships when we get too close to someone else and we kind of lose that sense of independence and autonomy. And we'll talk more about that in the next episode. But something I want to talk about further with respect to jealousy is how you discuss in your work that the goal here isn't to eliminate jealousy because you probably can't ever fully get rid of those feelings, right? But instead, it's about transforming your relationship with it. So what does it look like to transform your relationship with jealousy so that you can exist in this more secure, stable relationship state or orbit, as it were?
Yeah, the biggest start is to understand that you get to be the author of your life. In psychology, we talk about the external versus the internal locus of control. And so if you have a big external locus of control, meaning that you feel like you're constantly reacting to the environment and what's happening, and there's not the grounding within yourself, this is going to be a bumpy road. It's going to be a bumpy road. So we have to first start with the internal locus of control and understanding that you have a better relationship to that when you have a good ecosystem of community and support. Because I'm always conscious of the very individualistic, Western culture where it says you just got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, I trained in very feminist psychology, which would say that our sense of resilience is predicated upon the community that we have and who supports us. So I'll hold that context of needing good community, but also really coming back to an internal locus of control, right? So when you feel that moment of jealousy, if you start to let that control you and think you're stuck there, we have a lot of work to do of realizing that we are not just at the free will of our emotions. And that doesn't mean that we negate them. We do need to feel them, allow them. But also you have empowerment. You're having a tough day? How about we go for a walk? Again, coming back to the body, right? And that's not to write off the emotion, but to feel it and move through it. Okay? And so we go for a walk. We go take that kickboxing class if we really need to get it out of our systems. We cry. We orgasm if that's what you need to. My other mentor, Dr. Jolie Hamilton, who did her dissertation research all on jealousy, talks about how she'll be with her partner, and when she feels jealousy, she'll orgasm to be able to work through that. And when I recorded with her on my podcast, I was like, what a powerful way to do classical conditioning, to really rewrite your response to that. It's beautiful, right?
To eroticize jealousy, right?
Yes. So good. So good. I'm fully there. I love knowing that my partners are loved deeply by other people and that other people are attracted to them. How hot, right? How hot. And they choose to spend time with me freely, right? And jealousy can also be an epic way of seeing what you want. Because, yeah, it's really hot when your partner is there when you want them in the right amount of time and they're going to go have that freedom, right? But the second you feel like you're not getting what you want out of the dynamic and then you see them go do something, jealousy is out of the window. No way, never gonna happen, right? And so a really big piece of jealousy is when you have that reaction, okay, got it. I'm noticing in my body that I want to vomit right now because I feel so unstable. I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to go for the walk. I'm going to call someone else to co-regulate. And then I'm going to come back in my more grounded state. And from there, I'm going to sit. Is this the setting, the relationship? What about the history in this person? What about the mindset of my own dynamics are coming up here? And also, what is it indicative that I want? Is it more time? Is it more intentionality? Those sorts of pieces. How can you then come to your partner, your lover, and share what you're looking for and say, hey, I'm noticing that I'm feeling jealous. It'd be really meaningful if after your date, you give me a call when you finish up, or after your sleepover, you and I make plans to see each other in the next couple of days, right? So going through that full cycle of intense somatic reaction, regulation, reflecting and integrating and communicating what you want moving forward. Now, what's a painful reality is sometimes you might communicate that desire and someone will say no.
Mm-hmm.
Oof. Oh, okay. So then you're working through the realities of grief because just like in our friendships, right? You might want to be, we use words like best friends. You want to be best friends with someone. You want to hang out X amount of times. And they say, no, I don't really have that capacity. But then you see them go hang out with that friend. You see them post something, talk, oh my God, the grief, right? And so there is a real reality too in this world that you cannot control people. You can try, and then resentment builds and things explode, right? You cannot control people. And so there is a real grief in this too of recognizing that the people you love are autonomous human beings that might not also want to meet you in that same desire. And so how can you take time to really ground back in yourself and then also community? Because the more you have your own web of relationships, it's kind of like other resources, right? Love is just as much of a resource that is needed as food and water. And if you're in a dry desert and you have one little trickle of water and someone else comes and says, hey, can we share that? You would say, absolutely not. Well, depending on your ethics, I guess, depending on your ethics. But most people would be like, absolutely not. I need this. My survival. I need this, right? So now when we think about that in our current container of a society that is so individualistic, often struggles to get into intimacy in our friendships and relationships. And so romance is often the space where we get to be our quote unquote full authentic selves. The workplace can't hold that. Our coworkers can't hold that, XYZ. So then all of our resources are right here, right? So you're in that dry desert and there's that one water piece. And so someone says, can I share? And your body's going to say, absolutely not. And so the more that you build your own ecosystem of love and security, I will tell you the much freer it is to say, yeah, absolutely, have some water. I have this flowing ecosystem of so many different connections. And that doesn't have to be all sexual connections, right? We know that mono-poly dynamics exist.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're that monogamous partner, you can get resource from so many different types of love. It doesn't have to be just sexual. And so part of what I'm doing with my clients too is how can we build out your ecosystem of care as well? And so I feel like all of those pieces are really at the core of what we're processing when we're doing jealousy is the internal work, the somatic work, the rewriting of narratives. What a psychedelic. Things flip 180, truly in paradigms, right? And then, yeah, the relational community web so that you have other resources of love. And that can really change depending on your gender dynamics of what's accessible in relationships and who you can be real and authentic with. So many variables there.
Yeah. As you were talking, all I could think about was jealousy is information, and you can decide what it is that you want to do with it. Sometimes we let it control us and we end up acting very irrationally and doing things that sometimes we later regret. But there's also this more intentional way of navigating it and dealing with it, as you so beautifully described. So thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Nicole. I'm really looking forward to continuing it in the next episode, where we're going to talk all about communicating desires and designing erotic agreements. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work?
Yes, listeners, I would be delighted to have you head over to Modern Anarchy Podcast. Now, on my website, modernanarchypodcast.com, I have my dissertation for free. I have the psychedelic jealousy guide for free. I have the compass of consent for free. And I also have a pleasure wheel, which is one of my favorite tools, which is, if you're familiar with the emotion wheel, where it gives lots of different words to describe your internal landscape, I created one for pleasure and sex so that you can get even more clear on communicating what you want in your sexual dynamics. And so I have all of those resources, the podcast, and how to work with me all on my website, modernanarchypodcast.com. So thank you, Justin.
And we'll be sure to include a link to that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Yeah, it was such a joy.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller, and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.